Hey everybody, Brendan here. Welcome back to another tournament game analysis video. This is going to be round 2 of the May Excelsior Open. This was played back in 2023. I'm playing with the black pieces. I lost my first game against an international master, Naritzin, who we got into a Sicilian. I was playing with the white pieces, and he played an e6 Sicilian, and they're definitely a weakness of mine. So another weakness of mine is playing against strong title players. So I lost that one. Totally fine going into this one with decent spirits though, because again, it's an international master. Like I think it's actually just a small note before we start. It's pretty nice to play against really strong opponents over the board, like 400 plus points, because again, the risk is very little. You don't really lose many like rating points or anything. The gain is massive if you draw or win against them, and you still learn a lot. So like they're stressing out trying to beat you just so they don't lose a ton of rating, but yeah, on the other hand, it's not an issue. So that's why I always also recommend playing up if you're able to. So if you're on the edge of a section and you're not sure whether to play up or not, always play up. It's just so much better for your chess. So going into this game, my opponent played knight f3, which is the ready opening. It's incredibly flexible, so it allows e4, d4, or c4 still, and you can kind of choose your style against different setups. So for example, if you play c5, you have the option to still play e4, or you could play even c4. Arguably, maybe against c5, c4 is the better option, and my reasoning behind that is that when someone plays c5, they have to be prepared for e4, which is the Sicilian. But if they're playing c5 because they want to see it, then c5 isn't actually really an issue for you. C4 would go into much more slow waters, which is maybe something that a Sicilian player or someone that does play the Sicilian, they might not want to see that. Whereas with d5, you could play c4, you could play d4, even g3 against any of these moves is quite good as well. But after d5, my opponent plays b3. And this is something I'm pretty happy to see because it allows bishop to f5. And if you know about bishop to f5, it's actually just a reversed London system. And when you're playing black, obviously there's that saying, you want to equalize before you go for an advantage. And with bishop f5, in my opinion, I've already equalized. The reason I say this is because when you're playing the London system, if you lose a tempo in a solid opening like that, it tends to matter a lot less than it would in something like a Sicilian or even like a Catalan or something where a lot of complications can occur. Here, there's no central attack. Something like c4 hasn't been played, and even if it is, it's not really as great because they've already played b3 instead of delaying that move and playing e3 to develop stuff like that. It's more so just playing things slow, trying to play some sort of like Queen's Indian setup where you see like knight f6 and b6. So yeah, that's one thing. Another thing is, since I play the Semi-Slav, or even if you play the Queen's Gambit declined, you tend to play e6 at some point. And if you play earlier, this bishop is worse. So by playing bishop f5, you get to play both the London system and also just an improved version of Semi-Slavs or QGDs with c6 and either, e6 and either c6 or even c5. Yeah. So bishop to b2 was played, and I played e6. I think this is just the better move. c6 is a bit silly because it just wastes a little bit of time, in my opinion. By playing e6, it lets you play c5 at some point if that is the better choice. It might not always be. For example, after e3, knight f6, and d4, you might argue that c5 just opens up this bishop, and that's a little silly. But there's also sometimes a reason behind it. So for example, after knight bd7, bishop d3, something I would see online a lot is, personally, I would take, and c takes would be played. And the whole point of this is you are trying to go for e4. And that's a really decent idea. And for that reason, I actually think that c5 should probably be played here to just trade off these two pawns. But they didn't play that. Instead, they played queen takes on d3. And here I see no reason to play c5 to open up their bishop. At least in the other position, again, here, because they have e4 and then maybe even e5 as an idea to be really aggressive, it probably makes the most sense to try to play c5, open the position a little bit, so e4 might be a little too early, especially because we've developed a little bit smarter than our opponents. So that's really important to think about. But yeah, queen takes d3, c6, and then they castle, and I go bishop to d6 here. Now, bishop d6 is totally fine, but arguably knight e4 is a little bit stronger. And the reason behind this is, I can't really say it's twofold, but there's two key ideas here. First off, liquidating doesn't really hurt us, because it just really doesn't. Like, this knight also wants to go to f6. So if, for example, they play something like knight c3, we're pretty happy to take. And now we can go knight f6 to e4 at some point, and that's really nice. But if that's the only thought you have here, that might be a little naive, actually, because it turns out you actually have f5. And you can play this kind of like a Dutch, where you play bishop to d6 next. You could even still castle short. And then there's moves like g5, g4, and you start attacking the king side pretty effectively. For example, bishop b2, bishop d6, and c4 castles. Again, g5, g4 is on the way. And this is pretty effective as an attack. And it kind of goes on in line with normally how you'd play these positions anyways. You usually do put a piece on e4. So yeah, that's potentially why knight e4, in my opinion, might just be better. At least it's interesting. But I played bishop d6. Now, c4. Again, knight e4 is quite a good choice. But I castle instead, which I don't think is as good. Because, again, knight e4, this whole idea of going for f5, you see this in some semi-Slav positions, but you also see this, again, in the Dutch, or even like kind of like a weird King's Indian, but it's not quite a King's Indian, because black actually already has space, so getting a little bit more doesn't really hurt. And here we see knight e5. So knight e5 tends to be a good position in these stonewall structures, especially when there's a bishop on b2. And the reason why is because if we ever take it and the pawn gets there, we're kind of initiating some sort of attack for them. For example, if we take on e5, d takes. If we go back, that's a little sad, so that's already kind of worth it for them. But even something like knight e4 feels a little uncomfortable because at some point this knight can be kicked. Right now we have c5, so it's not like we're losing material or anything. But we have to also be a little careful. Like, what if they played b4 and then f3 right after? Because if we ever go to g5, there's always h4. This knight would be trapped. So, yeah, the knight feels a little unstable. Eventually f3 could come. And yeah, even something like bishop a3 could be considered as well, to further attack the square. Of course, then they'd have to watch out for e5 hanging. But yeah. All that to say, when we do this, even if they don't go for that, they could still try something like f4 and f5. And we'll actually see cases of this later in the game, where if they get a pawn on e5, then f5 could be a little bit more annoying, because if we ever take it, e6 could be a sacrifice later on to open up this bishop, and then they have a monster bishop. So not really ideal. I played queen c7 because there's one move I'm hoping for here. I don't think queen c7 is a bad move, by the way, because if they ever play c takes, I'm always planning to take with the e pawn, so this c file will not be opened up against my queen. But I'm really hoping they play f4, and this is something Stonewall players will do a lot, but it gives them a particular weakness, and that's actually going to be the focal point of this entire game. Here, I think knight f3 should be played. It's a bit of a sad move to make because you just put it on e5, but it's probably the smartest one. And here, there's a couple options. There's taking, and then something like c5 looked decent to me. But white's probably doing okay there as well. But there's also e5. which is interesting. They can't take on d5 yet because of e4. This would win a piece. So they have to do something else. If they take on e5, I'm happy to play knight takes, and we, of course, make a bunch of trades. But we end up in a position like this with knight d2, and then something like rook a8. And there's a very, very small edge for black, in my opinion. If you think this is equal, I think that's probably totally fair. But just the fact that black does have the slightly better structure for the moment. If they take, we will be taking either with the rook or the knight. And our pieces are slightly better placed. The knight's already on f6. Not really too important because they have knight f3 coming up. The queen is a little bit more active than this one. If knight f3, we have an option of queen c7 or even queen to h5 to kind of choose where we want to go. I think both moves would be totally fine here. And we're closer to actually getting some play on the d file as well. For example, taking on c4 could be an idea if they don't do anything immediate. For example, knight f3, is there actually taking on c4? There actually might be, because if they take here, we can take here. They'll likely pick that pawn back up anyways, but something to think about. But yeah, going back, queen c7, f4. And f4, the big problem here is now, as I mentioned before, whenever we play knight e4, there's always f3. And f3 is a little annoying, right? Because if they play that move, then all of a sudden, then we have to move back, and maybe they go e4, or maybe they just keep it there. They could also be happy with that. But with f4, they never have this opportunity again. And this is something that Stonewall players do a lot. So I was pretty happy here. I went knight e4, finally, because f3 wasn't an option anymore. They went knight d2. And of course I took it immediately, and then I went knight to f6. Arguably, there's maybe taking on e5, but I didn't like it because if I take on e5, they have d takes as well as e takes, but I think d takes is pretty interesting as well. And maybe they push for f5. And even if there's a weakened structure for them in the center, they start opening up the position a little bit, and I think that helps them thanks to this bishop. But by playing knight to f6, I have an immediate threat here, and it's a pretty important strategic one. Here they play queen e2, and I could go for it immediately as well, but I was a bit hesitant to. Bishop takes e5 is the move you always want to make here. And the reason why is because after something like f takes, there's knight to e4. This position looks pretty good, but there's actually d takes here. And after knight to e4, they can go f5. And this is what I mean of playing f5 and even having a pretty bad looking structure, because they're directly attacking my king. It feels like I have to take. F6 looks a little suicidal to allow. So if you take it, then rook takes f5. Queen e7 looks pretty natural. Just making sure that you're keeping an eye on e5, even f7. Also, bishop a3 is no longer possible. If a4, we could always play queen e6 to make sure we're not really worried about that. We're threatening the rook. They have to do something about that first. But they could take on d5 here and then play something like rook a f1. And honestly, I don't really think their position's that bad. We have a nice knight, but at some point they could even sacrifice with e6. And it doesn't feel like a massive advantage like you would normally expect with a good knight versus a bad bishop. This bishop isn't really the worst thing in the world. So that's why I avoided taking, and instead I went knight e4. Now here I think white has only one option, and I was kind of thinking they probably wouldn't go for it, because it just my intuition was kind of telling me they were just not really seeing how dangerous this knight versus bishop position really was. Maybe they haven't studied on their classics. They played rook f3. Instead, I really think that something like knight to d3 should be considered. And knight to f2, trying to trade these two pieces off. By playing rook to f3, this kind of tells me that they weren't seeing that idea and weren't thinking of taking this piece off the board. The thing is, I was still okay with it though. The reason why is because if they play knight d3 and go for that position, I still have, in my opinion, a better bishop than them. I would probably just go f5 here. And if they go knight f2, I might even just trade. And this bishop is not on the same color complex as the central pawns. And arguably that means that at some point this bishop may be able to target them, for example, in some endings. But also it's just good for coordination. The bishop is not impeded by the pawns. Like here, again, if this pawn, even if this pawn was just off the board, the position, the evaluation would change at least a little bit on this position. But instead, they played rook f3. And here, I played f5. I probably should have taken at this point. It's probably the right call. But I played f5. Here, I, again, should consider something like taking, maybe g6. But after g4, I was really concerned that they would get some sort of attack like this, right? But after rook d8 and rook h3, it's actually kind of unclear how they're going to attack that well. Like g5 doesn't really do too much for them. This knight is incredibly nice. I think that black is simply better here. I wouldn't quite say winning because there's still chances for them. Like f5 could always be an annoying pawn break they make. But yeah, black definitely has a serious advantage at this point. Instead, I played f5. And now it's very, very clear what I'm doing here. I'm going to be taking on e5 next move, if they allow me to. And that's exactly what they do. Knight d3 needs to be played. Here I was planning king h8 with rook g8, followed by maybe even g5. And I thought, yeah, I still have an advantage even in these positions where they go knight f2. But they go king h1. And now they don't even get the f5 break. And I think if they don't get something like f5 through, that's pretty bad. Especially because they'll get that pawn on e5 and they will never get the chance to play e6. So I immediately take on e5. There's not really anything else to consider here. Because after I take, they can take either way, f takes or d takes. They played f takes, but this knight is just a monster now. And it's not really me that's weak on the king side anymore. It's actually them. For example, here, moves like g5 and g4 are incredibly serious to think about. Instead, I played queen a5 first, making sure this bishop couldn't develop as easily. If they wanted to waste a little bit of time with a4, then I would be pretty happy with queen d2, going for a queen trade. Because I think even with the queens off, this position is just totally winning for me. But after rook f4, which felt a bit aimless to me, I played a not so great move. I played queen to d2. I like b5 quite a bit, just trying to settle what's going on in the center. For example, I could take, I maybe could consider pushing. I think taking is decent though. And the whole point is if they push, this bishop sucks. There's no bishop a3 anymore to develop it on this diagonal. Even if the places it's attacking, or you know, the squares it can go to, even if they're not the best, at least it's doing something and it's a little bit more active. And if they take and I recapture, they could go rook c1, but I go rook c8. Either way, I get the file, and this looks excellent for me. So I was pretty happy here as well, seeing this in the analysis. But after queen d2, there's a very critical line that white is able to play. And I go from a winning position to something that's maybe slightly better for me. But white's also not complaining here either. After queen takes d2, knight takes d2, there's the move c takes on d5. And this is something I didn't really pay enough attention to, or just didn't give enough credit to. And maybe I should have spent more time. Like here, again, when I played queen d2, I spent 5 minutes. Maybe I could have spent a little bit longer. Again, I'm kind of just winning here. b5 is very serious to consider. But with queen d2, takes, and then bishop to a3, which is what they played, instead they could take on d5. And after c takes, which, again, why would I play e takes and give them that protected passer on e5? They have rook to f2. It's very critical they play it like this, where after rook to f2, knight to e4, there's now rook to c2. And I can try fighting for the file with something like rook fc8, but they go rook c1. And they have the file now. They have quite a decent position. I can take on c2 once, so at least it's not as devastating, but yeah, this is not the same as what I had before, where I was getting the C file and they weren't even getting it. So it's going to take a while for black to untangle here, but arguably they're not even that much better. I still think black is slightly better because this knight is just so massive, but this is a pretty big deal too, the C file. So they definitely have their counterplay. With bishop to a3, I was incredibly happy. I went rook to f7, but again, this is not good. I should actually go rook to c8. And the reason has to do with the c takes d5 stuff. So after rook f2, knight e4, rook c2, they're doing decent, but it's just not the same. I think the engine showed a5 is incredibly strong here, and b5 is not good because they have rook to c1. So this isn't the right approach. Instead, yeah, a5 is really strong. I think it has to do with a4 and then taking just to open up the a file. But yeah, they don't really get the same type of open file that they did before. I think even here, maybe after a5, rook c1, you can go like king f7. So if they take, you could take with the e pawn and get your king to e6, and that's the argument here as well. But with rook f7, again, there's taking on d5, and then rook to f2, and then rook to c2. And I don't even get to trade off one of the rooks, which is a little bit sad here. But maybe black is still slightly better. Again, this knight is just so strong, but getting the c file is a big deal. So instead here, they went rook to d1, which already is helping me so much because they don't get the c file all to themselves anymore. After knight to e4, if they take here and even go rook c1, I have g5, rook f1, and h5, and I can just actually start just pushing on this side of the board. They're not infiltrating anytime soon, and by the time they even try to do it with rook c2 and rook c1, and then either rook c7 or rook c8, I've already made a lot of progress on the side of the board, and it's actually really nice for me to open this side because, again, the knight's here. It's doing a lot of work for me, but yeah, I'm just not really in any rush to do anything here. I just keep improving, and while they're improving as well, I've already made a lot of progress, so no worries there. They played bishop d6 though, and I played rook to d8. With rook to d8, I'm begging them to play c5 because now there's never c takes d5, which is something that I think I noticed around this point was a little bit of a problem for me. And yeah, they played it, and now there's no open file for them. So I was incredibly happy here, and now I know I'm just completely winning. Like, there's just nothing for white anymore, because something like b4, b5 takes just takes way too long. But I have my plans on the king side. So g5, rook f1, h5. They go g3, and I go king g7. King g2, rook h8, and I'm planning h4. As you can see, again, the play just comes very naturally at this point. And then they go h4. Now, here I thought for a little bit about what to do. I considered king g6, but I didn't really see what happens next. For example, if they go like rook to g1, which I think is the better move here, then they're always prepared from takes to just move their king and start actually playing on this one open file. So that's actually why I decided to take on h4 immediately to get the open file where they didn't play rook g1 yet. And king g6, it just doesn't make sense here, right? I don't see another move other than to take on h4 at some point, so I did it now. And then I played rook g8. Now I'm ready to move my king over, and I have a special idea. After king h2 and king h7, they go rook to g1 to oppose my rook. And here, all the moves to me came pretty naturally. I have rook to g4. And with rook to g4, I am threatening h4, of course, but I'm also kind of encouraging them to take. And if they do take, they're giving me a protected passed pawn. Here, this pawn on f5 is quite decent, but after rook takes g4, something that they felt like they had to do, if they went king h3, though, there's knight to f2 check. This would win the rook on d1. So that's why they didn't just defend it. Now, after f takes, my rook's already on the open file, and this pawn is now defended by the h pawn, and it's also passed. There's no pawn able to block it from just eventually pushing down the board. They went king to g1. I went king to g6. And after rook to f1, I took. If they do nothing else, if they just kind of shuffle here, like a4, I do, of course, have rook f2. This is something I could consider. But another good idea is just rook f3 to h3 and just taking this pawn. I don't think it's silly at all to consider. But with rook f1, it makes my job really simple because I've calculated at this point that I win h4 with rook takes f1, king takes f1, and then knight to g3, where they defend with, or they attack, I guess, with king to f2. But after knight to f5, I'm attacking h4 and preventing the only defense with bishop to e7. I'm also covering g3, so there's no king to g3 to defend h4. White plays b4. I take on h4, and we see a4. I bring my knight back because I'm just ready to push, and now we see b5. Now here, you obviously could play h4, but I think this does something that I would consider creating a win condition for white, or a drawing condition. It's counterplay. Generally, when you look at a position and you have a lot of options, it's nice to ask, what are the conditions my opponent needs to hold the game? And right now, the only one I could find, besides something silly like taking on d6, is if they somehow get this pawn to a6. This looks like it's really annoying. Turns out it might actually not work. For example, h4, a5. This might actually still be playable, and apparently black can win this, but this is insane to allow a6. Now, if we take on a6, they can take on c6. And if we take on b5, they can take on b7. And this one we're actually losing. But instead, even in this position, we should probably play a6. And this just prevents any and all counterplay. And there's not really a good reason to allow it. Even here, if we take on b5, this is another one of those kind of win condition positions where they could try a6. And we have to respond to it. Maybe taking it would be best, but allowing c6, there's no point in allowing these moves, even if this works out. By playing the natural a6, it makes sure that there's no weird pawn break issue. A5, we could always play b takes. Again, c takes is totally fine as well, but a takes is also really simple. Yeah, so a6, no nonsense. Again, just avoid counterplay. Don't give your opponent a win condition, which is if they could somehow push one of those pawns through. Absolutely no reason for it. I played b6, or sorry, they played b6. I played h4. And now here, arguably, there's e4, where after d takes, there's d5. C takes is another one of those kind of win condition positions that I talked about, where they have c6. So instead, e takes is much simpler, where if they go e6, we can play king f6. We're ready to take the pawn. If they push it, we can play knight takes. And there's no counterplay. But they played bishop c7 instead. And I played knight g3, so the idea here is now there's going to be no e4 break, but also it covers kind of more useful squares. It still covers g3, but on e4 it also covers f2, which can be useful when trying to push the pawns. We see bishop d8, knight e4 check, king g2, and king to h5. We see bishop e7, g3. H3 is fine as well, but after king to h2, if I play g3, there's king takes. So I didn't see a reason to play it like this. I thought g3 was better, because if they go to h3, there's knight to f2 check, followed by king g2 and king g4, and the pawns will just push through. And here, after a5 or moving the king away, just king g4 itself. They played king h1, I played h3, bishop f6, maybe hoping I take, but that's a very silly thing to do. And I played knight to f2, and they resigned here. And the reason why is because after knight to f2, king g1, there's h2 check, and this is forced mate. If they go to g2, it's mate immediately with just promotion. But if they go to f1, we can promote, king e2, and then queen to d1 is now checkmate. So yeah, a pretty solid game. I would say I made a few mistakes, and it had to do with the fact that I was trying to go for more than maybe I should have. If we go all the way back here, first off, allowing c takes was a little silly. It's nice to have the queens off, because you can consider having queens on in general a win condition almost, where your opponent will sometimes have quite a bit of counterplay against you, and maybe, you know, create some sort of mating attack. Even if it doesn't work out, it's counterplay. It confuses things, and that's not really great. But again, allowing counterplay on the c file with c takes d5 was just not smart at all for me. So yeah, that's one of them. And then the other big one here was just going for f5 and just kind of delaying taking on e5, maybe when I should have instead. Luckily, my call worked out. They didn't go for that, and they allowed me to play f5 and then take. But it's kind of like a lesson too. It's best not to just assume your opponent's going to play that. I wouldn't say it's playing for tricks here, but maybe playing for positional tricks, kind of. Yeah. Then again, I did believe in my position regardless of whether or not they went knight d3 to f2. But yeah, I probably should have taken on e5 at this point. That's going to be it for this game. I hope you guys enjoyed. I think it's pretty instructive for these good knight versus bad bishops positions. Generally, again, you can just kind of advance your pawns, just slowly improve your pieces, and things will work out like it did in this game. So yeah, that's going to cover it. And I will see you all in round 3, where I'll be playing with the white pieces. That's it.